Hello. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you're all having an excellent day. My name is Marco Valdez, and today I will be your host during this trip through history. Currently, I'm a student at Tech Milenio High School, and because of my exercise 10 of the Contemporary World subject, I will have the honor to present you my presentation that talks about the Cold War, which was a confrontation mostly between the United States and the Soviet Union, based largely on the avarice of both nations, which would finally affect and shake the world for a 45 years period. Let's begin. The Cold War was a restricted rivalry that developed after World War II, specifically in 1946 to 1991, in which the United States, the Soviet Union, and their allies were locked in a long, tense conflict. The Cold War reached its peak between 1948 to 53. During this specific period, the Soviets unsuccessfully blocked the western-held sectors of West Berlin. As a response, the US and its European allies formed the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, which was a unified military command to resist the Soviet presence in Europe. After the death of the Soviet dictator Joseph Stalin in 1953, the Cold War tensions relaxed. Nevertheless, the confrontation continued. Another intense but important stage occurred in 1962, in which the Soviets began secretly installing missiles in Cuba that could be used to launch nuclear attacks on U.S. cities. This mainly sparked an important event known as the Cuban Missile Crisis. Finally, the 45-year standoff between the West and the USSR ended when the Soviet Union dissolved back in 1991. The term Cold War refers to a conflict or confrontation between nations that doesn't involve directly military action at all, but mainly and primarily through the use of political, economical actions and the strategic use of propaganda on their favor. The Cold War was an ideological rivalry between nations, short of military conflict, sustained hostile political policies, and an atmosphere of strain between opposed countries. Usually, this term is mostly used to refer to the US and Soviet conflict that dated in 1946 to 1991. Fun fact, this term was first used by the English writer George Orwell in an article published in 1945 to refer to what he predicted would be a nuclear stalemate between two or three monstrous superstates, each possessed of a weapon by which millions of people can be wiped out just in a few seconds. Now, I will talk about some of the economical and political systems of the era. First of all, the capitalism works as an economic and political system in which a country's trade and industry are controlled by private owners for profit rather than by the state. It is based on an individual initiative and favors market mechanisms over government intervention. Private actors own and control property in accord with their interests and demand and supply freely set prices in markets in a way that can serve the best interests of society. Its essential motive is to make a profit. This economic system requires a free market economy, which is based on the law of supply and demand, which basically states that increased demand for a product means an increase in prices for that product. As you can see on your right, there is a comparative table between the positive aspects and the negative aspects of this economic system. Some positive aspects are that it ensures efficiency, since it's self-regulated through the competition. It meets and covers the needs of the population, is beneficial to the society as a whole. And also, this system is based and promotes innovation through a free market economy. Some negative aspects are capitalism ignores social needs. This system at a certain point results in wealth inequality, and sometimes it doesn't promote equal opportunity. Now, I will talk about the main representatives of capitalism. Definitely, two of the main representatives of this economic system are Adam Smith, which is considered as the father of capitalism. He wrote a book called The Wealth of Nations, which was crucial to the foundation of modern economic theories. Also, in one of his works called An Inquiry into the Nature and Causes of the Wealth of Nations, he described the ways in which people are motivated to act in their own self-interest. Also, we have Ludwig von Mises. He was an economist of the Austrian school who argued for free markets, government manipulation of money, and was totally against socialism. He is best known for his arguments against socialism. Now, I will talk about socialism, which was another important economic system at the time. On the other hand, totally opposing capitalism, socialism works as an economic system in which all legal production and distribution decisions are made by the government, with individuals dependent on the state for food, employment, healthcare, among others. In this economic system, the government, rather than the free market, determines the amount of output or supply and the pricing levels of these goods and services, controlling much of the economy's resources. Socialism is based on government limitations and private controls of resources. It basically aims for public rather than for private ownership. Also, on your right, you can see some positive aspects and negative aspects of this economic system. Some positive aspects are that this system can provide minimum basic income for its inhabitants. Also, money is used where it's mostly urgently needed. Another factor that should be noted is that this system closes the huge gap between the poor and the rich. Unfortunately, this economic system also has some negative aspects. For example, people have less to work for and feel less connected to the fruits of their own effort. Also, the engines of economic growth are much weaker, since the population doesn't have initiatives to innovate. Also, in this economic system, there's too much power in the hand of the politicians. Finally, history has even taught us that this regime oftenly fails. Now, just like in the previous economic system, I will talk about the main representatives of the socialism. First of all, we have Karl Marx. He was a German philosopher, sociologist, journalist, and mainly a socialist revolutionary. With the help of his good friend Friedrich Engels, he wrote the Communist Manifesto, in which they expressed what they termed scientific socialism. Marx believed that capitalism was a volatile economic system that will suffer a series of ever worsening crises. He was strongly convinced that this economic system was destined to collapse. Also, another important representative of this economic system is Friedrich Engels. He was a German socialist philosopher, mostly known for his authorship with Karl Marx of some of the most important and influential works on the history of socialism as we know it today. As I mentioned before, with the help of Karl Marx, he co-authored the Communist Manifesto, introducing their concept and vision of socialism as a result of the conflict and problems inherited in the capitalism system. Just like his good friend and collaborator Karl Marx, he had a criticism of capitalism. Now, as you can see, we have arrived to the interview section, in which I will present you the multiple questions and answers that I obtained while I was doing interviews to several subjects that lived during the time of the event or that have knowledge about the topic. In this first interview, subject 1 is someone who lived during the time of the war. The first question is, what countries were the world leaders during this period? Subject 1 said, the main countries and world leaders during the period were the three most dominant countries from this period: the United States of America, the United Kingdom, and the Soviet Union, which were the most powerful countries at the time, and of course all of their allies, being them the main protagonists in the war and above all the most important, since the war was always around them. The next question says, why did countries who were allies during the wars become enemies afterwards? And he responded, well, the answer to this question is a bit complicated, but as we know, US, UK, and even the Soviet Union were allies during the Great World War II. This was mainly developed out of the necessity at that specific time. They were not forced to do it, but it was the best decision. It should be said that even though they were allies, they never had a good relationship between nations. Subsequently, during the Cold War, they became the main enemies, since both of them wanted to promote their competing political ideologies. While the United States was thinking about the system known as capitalism, the Soviet Union was thinking about a government based on communism. Also, he mentioned that the Cold War mainly took place in the American, European, and Asian continent, but specifically in nations such as the US, the Soviet Union, and even Vietnam, in which occurred the Vietnam War, a deadly war during the Cold War. He also mentioned that during the war there was an atmosphere of fear in the eyes of the people. Even when we were safe at home, we could feel a certain concern when watching the news or reading the newspaper about events, hoping that it would end soon. During the war, it was a bit common that people that you knew lost their relatives for participating in that war. It was very sad to think about what they were experiencing at that moment. He also described some of the weapons that the two world powers have at their disposal, such as large caliber automatic weapons, cannons, tanks, and even infantry weapons such as machine guns, AK-47s, AKMs, among multiple others. Subject 2 represents a person with previous knowledge about the topic. She said that the United States and the Soviet Union were the world leaders countries during this period, since they were the main powers that survived the World War II, and they were the most powerful and above all the main ones in the war. She also mentioned one of the reasons why the US became the enemy of the Soviet Union. It was mainly due to a problem of ego and greed between both nations, since both nations wanted to be recognized as the most powerful country in the entire world. It should be noted that even though they were allies during the World War II, they mainly did this for their own convenience and benefit, since they have always studied each other to avoid any future betrayal, since before this war, these nations were already considered as enemies. She said that this event mainly happened in the US and the Soviet Union, since they were the protagonists in this war, but there were also confrontations in places like America, Europe, and Asia. She thinks that the opinion of people was really varied. Nobody really wanted a war. Some supported their country and others were influenced by the propaganda of their nation. Consequently, they could have developed a negative mentality and thinking towards the other nations. But without a doubt, fear and worry were the most frequent opinions about this war. She mentions that even though this conflict was a Cold War, nations had at their disposal ballistic missiles, cannons, machine guns, rifles, and even the capacity of nuclear weapons. Undoubtedly, during wars, it can be seen how ruthless human beings can become, only with the intention of obtaining more power, sacrificing thousands of lives in the process. However, some very important virtues are also shown, such as teamwork, innovation, especially during these confrontations, many inventions occurred, and also this war showed the great love and respect that each of one feels for their nation by sacrificing their own lives to safeguard their country and their families. We were also able to observe two economic systems that impacted nations during the war. I'm talking about capitalism and socialism, economic systems so important that we can even see them today in certain countries. Although these economic systems have their pros and cons, it has undoubtedly taught all of humanity that the perfect system does not exist, but that each system has its characteristics that makes it special and efficient. What remains for all of us is to turn to the past to learn from the mistakes in order to improve them in the future, and thus to be closer to an increasingly brilliant society.